All right, everyone, welcome back to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. If this is the first time you're joining us for the segment today, or you're catching this on our Facebook channel, we're keeping it very casual today. Shannon, we're keeping it very casual today. So
It's
nice and
cash. I gotcha.
relaxed. Yeah, we've got some listener questions we're going to go through here, and I'll just formally introduce you, Shannon. I know that most people will already know who you are if they're fans of the podcast, because you're everywhere. As you pointed out in one of our internal chats the other day, you're on all of our video meetings.
I'm
We've
quite
got
famous, Ian.
you're very famous, and you might have actually seen Shannon Vasconcelos in print media because she's being interviewed left and right because of her expertise with college finance. So Shannon, welcome to the show again.
Thank you, Ian.
It's
I
great to
very
have.
much enjoy being here.
It's great to have you here, and we're just going to tackle some Q&A. We're going to bring the famous Shannon Vasconcelos to the radio show where she got her start, and we'll have some awesome questions for you. We've also got some questions that I'm going to answer, and hopefully that can, hold up to the quality that you're establishing on the show. So
It will be a challenge, Ian. We'll
yeah,
see. Show me what you got, Ian.
I'm going to have a hard time here. So let's start with an admissions-based question because I'm the host and I want to talk first. So do you have a question that I can answer?
I sure do. The first question for you comes in from Christine, not the Christine that we just talked to, different Christine. And she asked, how can you show a college a virtual demonstrated interest?
Good question. Very relevant question. Actually, just yesterday, I went to the website for the University of Virginia and I signed up for a virtual information session and tour, which will be on April 8th. A number of us are doing this because we want to see a little bit more about the school. We want to see how some of these virtual info sessions are different or similar from each other. And if I were a student, this would be a great way for me not only to learn more about the institution, but also to demonstrate to the University of Virginia that I'm interested in the school. Because if you're going to go and register to spend an hour of time with a presenter from home, that's going to indicate to that college that you have some level of interest in the school. So this is great. I think it's actually great news, Shannon, because in the past, if you wanted to demonstrate a similar kind of interest to UVA, you'd have to get on a plane and go stay in a hotel overnight and go and actually visit campus. And because that is not so widely available during pandemic times, you have an opportunity to do it more remotely from your home. So I think that that's the first major difference over the last year that we've seen as compared to prior years with more normal student visits.
And I love that, actually, as someone concerned with college finance, the fact that in the past, it costs quite a lot of money to demonstrate interest to a college in that way. If you wanted to go to UVA, but you lived in, I almost said Washington, which would have made things confusing depending on which Washington you're talking about, but you lived in California, you would have to fly across the country and spend all of that money on plane tickets. And of course, not everyone was able to do that. So in this environment, again, one of the minor silver linings is that it does kind of even the playing field in that way for folks who have a lot of money and don't have a lot of money are equally able, or at least close to it, demonstrate interest in an online manner in terms of virtual visits.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And I think you can also demonstrate more interest to more schools because you can get more of these virtual visits lined up than you would be able to do in person. But that you also can't set up virtual visits for 100 schools. That would be somewhat ridiculous, right? So it still allows you to pick the ones that you're most excited by, but also gives you a little bit more flexibility to demonstrate that. I would just add the same old methods of communicating with a college admission officer who is your regional rep still apply here. If you have questions, you can reach out to a college to ask those questions. I actually encouraged one of my students to draft an email to students at some schools that he was interested in. You can usually email the admission office and say, hey, I've got some questions. Do you have any current students who are interns in your admission office that I could ask these questions to? And they'll say, yeah, here, you can email this kid. He's a biology major. He's a current junior, and ask some of those questions. And that's a great way both to demonstrate interest and learn more about the school. And one of the things that you'll hear from me is always demonstrate interest in a way that has value to you in terms of learning more, not just demonstrating interest for its own sake, right? So easy way to open up some channels of communication, do some research, learn more about schools. All right, you ready for a finance? Go ahead. No,
I
go
just
ahead.
wanted to just clarify real quick because I think people do get this misimpression that you need to demonstrate interest. So you should email the admissions officer some question that you could easily find the answer to on their website.
That's right.
I think that's often the impression, but I like what you're saying. Do this in a way that actually adds value to you in your search process. Ask a question you would really like to know the answer to that you
That's
can't
right.
easily find on the website.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
All right. First question for you. I'm going to try and
Yes.
decipher some of these finance terms. I think I got
Okay.
it. So this is from Natalie. Let's say the
Yes.
cost of attendance minus the EFC is $20,000 in need. How do I
Yes.
figure out what a college will provide in grants for the need portion, and then what the college provides in scholarships or merit toward tuition? Do colleges provide need-based grants and merit scholarships? Or if a school gives grant aid, is there nothing additional in merit that is granted? How do we find this out prior to applying and getting the award? So 9 questions in there, Shannon. Let's see if you can handle.
Yes.
Really
I'll
thorough. I
see
like
how.
I like this question. This is a
Yes.
great one, Natalie.
It is a great one. So Natalie prefaces the question with this formula: the cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution. Let's say that equals $20,000 for this
Okay,
family,
great.
and that's what's referred to as the family's need. And what that formula is the basic formula of the financial aid process. Every school does this same thing. They take how much they cost, they subtract out what they think you should be able to come up with, and the difference is your need, and that is your maximum need-based aid eligibility. But Natalie's question is getting at how does this need and the need-based aid interact with merit scholarships?
Right.
And I think Natalie has the impression that Natalie conveys, I think, is a little bit turned around. So I'd like her to
Okay.
flip her perception just slightly, because she asks, if a school gives grant aid, is there nothing additional in merit that is granted? And it does not work that way.
Okay.
Um,
Good
but
news.
Good news, correct. Yeah. So it's not, if you qualified for a $10,000 grant, or in Natalie, I'll use Natalie's scenario because that's the smart thing to do. You qualify for $20,000 in need-based aid. You get a $20,000 grant. Does that mean that you are now excluded from getting the school's maybe $50,000, full tuition merit scholarship? No,
Okay.
absolutely not.
Good news.
Um,
Great.
that is good news. Now I'll get to the less good news.
Uh-oh.
Your need-based aid does not typically affect your merit scholarships, but your merit scholarships do affect your need-based aid eligibility. So in this example that Natalie gives, where the student's need is, say, $20,000, they would be eligible for potentially $20,000 of need-based aid. But if the school has already awarded them, let's say, a $15,000 merit scholarship, and the merit scholarships do typically come first. Those come from the admissions office, who they've accepted you, they've identified you as a particularly desirable student that they want to recruit. They're offering you a $15,000 merit scholarship. Then your file goes to the financial aid office, who does this basic calculation, determines you have $20,000 of need, but they say, oh, you needed 20,000, but we have already awarded you a $15,000 merit scholarship. Therefore, you are eligible for $5,000 in need-based aid.
Okay.
They count merit scholarships towards meeting your need. So if the student is awarded a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 merit scholarship, you now have
It
no
erases the need.
need-based aid eligibility. Exactly
And
right.
that seems to make sense to me. I think that where that creates a real problem for a family is if the EFC that the college says a student or family has doesn't align with what the family's perception of that EFC is, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah,
Okay.
because they cannot, if you are awarded any federal student aid, they legally cannot say that your merit scholarship went to cover your EFC and we'll still meet your full need with need-based aid. They actually legally cannot do that. And so you're absolutely right. As long as a family actually feels like they can contribute their EFC, there's no problem. But that is often not the case.
I just a sub
Yeah.
question. What percentage of
Yes.
families would you say agree with the EFC? What percentage of families
Zero.
are like, yeah, that's exactly right. That's what we can
Zero
afford.
point zero.
Okay, great. That's what I thought. That was my instinct.
Almost nobody believes that they can actually come up with, if a family is asked how much can you contribute to college, it is always less than their EFC.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and in terms of how you can figure this out in advance, colleges do have net price calculators on their websites that are required to calculate or estimate for you need-based aid eligibility. So you can play around with net price calculators. They are not required to estimate merit scholarship eligibility. So that is kind of a wild card in the equation at many schools. The best net price calculators do actually incorporate merit scholarships. So you could play out this whole scenario. At many schools, they do have very robust net price calculators. And when you see a calculator asking for grade point average or SAT scores, anything like that, that tells you they're incorporating merit scholarships.
Nice.
And so there are some schools that do provide a very good kind of all-encompassing estimate up front. Others do not, and it is a bit more of a guessing game. You know, you can assume, it sounds like Natalie kind of, I assume she listens to the show
She
quite a
seems to
bit.
get it, yeah.
She gets it, I think. And so she knows you can maximize chances of merit scholarships by applying to schools where you stand out, where you're above average, but it is less predictable than the need-based aid where you can use a net price calculator. Having said that, net price calculators currently do a decent job of predicting aid for this upcoming school year. Where they will start becoming less reliable is for the 23-24 school year, because the government just passed legislation that is changing the federal financial aid calculations quite a bit. Those net price calculators may not be particularly accurate if you're wanting to kind of predict future years, because things may be changing just a bit. They're the best tools we have. They'll give you kind of ballpark. For most people, they'll still get you in the right ballpark, but we're in a weird time right now where they're less accurate than usual.
Good to know.
Yeah. All right, next question for you, Ian, is from Melisandre.
Okay.
And she asks, what are your thoughts on what has happened with the crazy amount of applications? And she gives us an example, 100,000 applicants to NYU, I think, this year. What's this all about? Is this due to no test scores, no fee to apply? How on earth will the admissions officers actually get through all of these applications?
That's a great question. You actually posted something yesterday morning that I thought was really interesting. And if I hadn't closed our group chat, I could pull it up and take a look at it. But it was indicating growth or change in application numbers at different types of institutions. Right? What we saw was the most dramatic increase in application numbers tended to be at private and more selective colleges and universities. Am I remembering that right, Shannon?
Yes, and larger universities. I think those are the common denominators: private, selective, large. Public, less selective, and smaller schools did not see anywhere near those kinds of dramatic increases.
And so what I think that this reflects is, first of all, the test optional change and the effect that that had on how students perceived their chances of getting into schools was enormous. We saw some information from Boston University that said about 70% of their applicants in the ED round applied test optional, and about that same percentage of the admitted students were test optional, which is a really, really striking number for a school that hadn't been test optional previously. I think a lot of students took the opportunity to approach admission with a sense of greater confidence about getting into more selective schools, but also, on the other side of the coin, some trepidation about the likelihood of certain outcomes working out in their favor, given all of the uncertainty that was surrounding the admission process. So I think when you combine the fact that students both thought, I might have a chance at Harvard and Yale and Stanford this year if they're not looking at testing, plus, there's going to be so many apps, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get into my local UC or my local CSU, that's just inflating application numbers everywhere. Honestly, we are still trying to figure out what the impact of this is going to be. We still don't have a full cycle's data to take a look at this. We've seen some really funky things. I was talking with a colleague this morning who said that she had a student that was put on that was deferred early from Chapman University, I think it was. She wrote a letter of continuing interest and was actually offered a spot in the class very soon after that. So I think colleges are also in a position where they're saying, oh my gosh, we have so many applications. Which of these students are actually interested in our school
Right.
versus those who, might just be using us as a safety in this particular circumstance. So right now, I think the uncertainty started with families, has extended to colleges. You're going to see enormous amounts of use of the wait list. I think there are going to be some head scratching decisions. Colleges that have historically not relied on demonstrated interest to influence their decisions might find that they have less of a strength in being able to predict what the possible yield is going to be. So it's a really, really funky circumstance where we are occupying a new territory for decision making, and we will have to wait and see how it all shakes out with these schools. Another really interesting stat that I saw today was the yield at schools that are typically the best yielders, like Stanford, dropped really dramatically from 2019 to 2020 in the wake of the start of the pandemic. So Stanford typically yields about 82% of students that are admitted. That means 8 out of 10 students are saying yes to Stanford when Stanford says yes to them. In 2020, that number was closer to, I think, 60%. So a pretty steep drop in the kids that are actually saying yes, even at the schools where we would imagine most students would want to still go. So it's been really, really, really difficult to understand. Shannon, just as a quick follow-up, we got to go to a break, but how would this impact how financial aid offices are using their merit scholarships? Are they likely to be a little bit less generous at the front end, or are they sort of following the same policy they always would with those scholarships?
I think it's all up in the air because schools don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so I think you might see schools experimenting, and some schools may hold back a little bit. Some schools might be extra generous right up front to try and bring those yield numbers up, try and pull students in. One thing we are absolutely recommending to families, as we do every year, but going back and negotiating,
Yeah.
not taking a school's first offer. We saw it play out last year when schools were very worried about their enrollment being extra generous, extra willing to negotiate. And I think the same thing may play out this year.
Awesome. So we don't know. things
Stay
are
tuned.
wild out there.
Wild West.
Yeah, and I think that it's just going to draw out the process a little bit longer. So we'll have more information in a couple of months, and for every individual student, you'll have more information. I think by May, June as well. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We've got more listener questions to power through, so don't go away. We'll be here when you get back.